All right. Hey there, and happy Monday to you. Are you a successful business owner who has perfected a process and wants to leverage that into an info product or an online course, but you just cannot seem to get it launched? Or maybe you are an aspiring entrepreneur still working a W-2 job and hating it, and dreaming of creating a course like as a side gig that might ultimately be successful enough that you can quit that job and do this full time. But all of your attempts so far have failed. Well, you are so in the right place, because in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to show you why the conventional wisdom on creating a course and selling it is absolutely, positively, 100% wrong and sets you up to fail. But I am also going to introduce you to a better way, a way that makes so much more sense, called agile marketing. But more than that, I'm going to introduce you to how I have specifically adapted agile marketing for small businesses like coaches, consultants, speakers, authors, and trainers who want to create and sell profitable courses without having a blog, an email list, a big team, any team, a huge ad budget, or even a product yet. But very quickly, let me just tell you in 20 seconds or less who I am and why you should even listen to me in the first place. So my name is Kim Snider. I am the creator of an investment workshop way back in the day, seems like forever ago now, that has generated over $31 million in total revenue since 2001 and counting, and put my investment firm on the list of the Inc. list of fastest growing privately held companies in America in both 2008 and 2009. Now, after my husband and I, quote, retired to South Carolina in 2011, I started several lifestyle businesses to support my polo habit. No, that's not what we say. To keep my mind busy. That's it. That's the story, and I'm sticking with it. But what I quickly discovered was that despite all of my knowledge and prior success, I simply couldn't get a profitable funnel built. Not the way that everyone else was teaching it. So just as I did with investing for retirement, I found a better way. And that is what I want to share with you now. But before I do, let me just lay some groundwork. First, let's define the word project. The Project Management Institute says it is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So think about that. By that definition, is sending a man to Mars a project? It is, right? A really big project. What about building a piece of software that tracks terrorists around the world? Sure it is. We'll talk more about that in a minute, right? What about building a business or a course? Would you agree that all of those are projects and that the only difference is just the size or the scope? Because I'm going somewhere with this. I keep saying that, but before I do, now let's just define one more term. My definition of a sales funnel is it's a series of steps that move a prospect to buyer in the shortest possible time at the lowest possible cost. Is building a sales funnel a project? Yep. Because what's the result we want? It's a customer that we acquired profitably. That's the result. So it turns out that the answer to why you can't get your info product launched doesn't lie with the marketers. They are leading you down the wrong path. But instead, the answer lies with the people who study project management for a living. Makes sense. And in project management, there are two approaches. The conventional wisdom when it comes to creating and selling an info product is what project managers call the Big Bang approach. You start with a tiny speck of an idea, and you explode that into a product surrounded by a galaxy of content, lead magnets, landing pages, Facebook ads, webinars, sales pages, order forms, etc., 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 and hope that it can support life. Yours. Project managers will also sometimes refer to this as the waterfall approach, and sometimes you'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. But most of the time, you'll hear it called the Big Bang approach. It's two different metaphors for the same type of process. It's a linear process. It assumes a straight line path from beginning to end because you know where you are and you know where you're going. You know the end result, what the end result's going to look like, and it is very often visualized in the form of a Gantt chart, if you're at all familiar with those, which was, by the way, developed in World War I. So why anyone thinks that this is still the most efficient way to manage a process is somewhat remarkable, but nonetheless, people do, especially, apparently, digital marketers. Now, for our purposes, there are three glaring problems with this approach. First is it takes a bunch of time and money to create all that stuff. A lot of time and money. Have you ever tried it? Second, the 80-20 rule eats our lunch. Some places it is our friend, but here it is our enemy. Here are the sad numbers, right? And this is just how the world works. 20% or less of the content that we produce will create 80% of the traffic. Even more so, 10% of that content produces 90% of the opt-ins. 20% or less of your emails get opened. Only 20% of your ads are profitable. 80% of your offers fail. And more than 80% of your leads drop out of the funnel without buying. That is why it is called a funnel, because people are lost at each step. So put the time and money that it takes to build a sales funnel together with an 80% failure rate at each component part, and it's an obvious recipe for disaster. Now, let's just add insult to injury here. Because if you do that math, 20% times 20% times 20%, not only does this have a 0.0032% chance of success, assuming you don't have the team and the budget that big companies have to build out and test multiple versions of every single component of this funnel, every piece of content, every page on your website, every lead magnet, every email, every ad, etc. But the conventional wisdom assumes that you have built your product before you even get to this point, okay? And a list. You've built a product that people buy at the end of this process. But here's the thing. What if you build that product and a list of people who you are assuming, are interested in that product, and you put all that time and money in and no one wants it? Or you build all these bells and whistles that no one cares about. This happens all the time. A product in search of a problem to solve is the single biggest mistake I see entrepreneurs make. And believe me, I know it when I see it because I have done it myself a bunch of times. It's no coincidence, really, that when I look back at the 14 companies that I've started, every single one that was only moderately successful or was an abject failure was built top down with a grand plan. I was certain that everyone would want it. Why wouldn't they, right? I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I saw the value. I was scratching my own itch. How could they not? I can promise you, if you try to build a business this way and it's successful, it's just a happy coincidence, because 9 times out of 10, you end up polishing a turd trying to make it sell. And as I just said, I've built my fair share of turds. So what's the answer? Let me tell you a quick story. One of my companies was a boutique software development shop called the API Guys. And in 2014, roughly, we were growing like crazy, but getting projects out the door was just this, it was maddening. the bigger we got, the harder it was getting to satisfy our customers, because it seemed like even though I thought we had a meeting of the mind when we agreed on the scope at the end, by the time we finished the project, somehow the customer wasn't happy with it. So I read a book called Scrum, which described how applying a set of methodologies, which for simplicity's sake, we're just going to lump under this category called agile, was solving these intractable software development problems. And just to give you an idea, agile is the reason that Amazon can launch a new feature on its website every single day, which is crazy. If you're a software developer, you know that. It's why the Red River Army Depot in Texas was able to roll out armored Humvees 39 times faster than before. It's how, I mentioned this before, it's how the FBI finally created a massive terrorist tracking database after literally a decade of failed attempts and having spent over $1 billion on software previously that didn't work. So I hired a coach to help us implement agile software development. And as advertised, among other things, it was a deceptively simple framework for completing complex projects. Because one of the things that I love about it most, and is most helpful for our purposes, is that it tells you exactly what to do and what order to do it in. But I also learned while we were working on this that Agile was being used for other things than just software development. Using Agile for building companies was popularized in the book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. You might have heard of it. It's become sort of a movement among Silicon Valley types who are looking for a roadmap. And nowadays there is also something called Agile marketing. But the problem with Agile marketing to date is that it has so far really only been adapted for large marketing organizations, IBM types, not for small businesses like ours. But it turns out, with 2020 hindsight, that I realized I had built my investment firm that I mentioned earlier with a very rudimentary form of agile marketing without even realizing it. And likewise, as I mentioned earlier, every one of my successful companies were built this way, and the successful ones, not so much. So what is agile marketing? Now, this is going to be a bit of an oversimplification, but for now, the most important aspect is that agile is iterative. So instead of this, the Big Bang, we do this. I heard someone describe this approach as being like sailing, where you have to tack to find the wind. You're changing direction until you find the wind that helps you go fastest. And then once you find it, off you go. So to help you get from pencil drawing to the Mona Lisa in your business, I have created the Info Marketer's Agile Manifesto. And I follow this in my own business and have had tremendous results since I adopted this approach. The first tenet is to focus on the highest value task first. Now, this may seem obvious, but you'd be amazed how hard some people find it to agree on what the highest value task is. I'll give you a hint. In our case, it is not building your product, your course, a list, or a bunch of content. It's developing an offer that you have proven people will pay you for. So the clarifying question that you ask to get to the highest value task is this: what is the one thing that if I did that right now would make everything else easier or unnecessary? If you've ever read the book The One Thing, you'll be familiar with this idea. And then the corollary to that question is that you only work on one thing at a time. Multitasking is evil. And as much as possible, it should be banished from your kingdom. Only once that one thing is completely finished do we move on. The second tenet is to embrace the misses as part of the process. Expect them, look for them, learn from them, embrace them. One of my very favorite sayings, it's a Zen Buddhist saying, and it is that the arrow that hits the bullseye is the result of 100 misses. And because we know we won't hit the target every time, especially in the beginning, the third tenet is start with a minimum viable everything. Now, minimum viable, right? You might have heard of minimum viable product, but minimum viable is defined as the version that allows you to collect as much validated learning as possible with the least amount of effort. Your assumption is that no one will ever read this blog post. No one will attend your webinar. No one will buy what you are selling. So you only build minimum viable whatever until that assumption is proven untrue. And all of these are what we call fractal, meaning they apply at all different scales. For example, a project can be a blog post or a moonshot, right? That's fractal. Minimum viable X applies equally to your course, your website, or do I spend time finding images for this slide deck that I am assuming no one will see, or maybe they will see it, but I will end up scrapping it because I got feedback that showed me a better direction. You'll find that, in this way of thinking, we use words like minimum viable, working hypothesis, and placeholder a lot. Rather than getting, just as an example, right? Rather than getting all twisted up about the title of your course or your webinar, for example, we just name it. It's a minimum viable title. And think of it as a placeholder until something better comes along. And when you operate under these principles, you'll find that it's kind of like this spirograph. Remember those from when you were a kid? Dating myself. But the little wheel in the middle has minimal movement, right? But each iteration contributes to the bigger picture. Not this. Make sense? So if you have found this introduction to Agile Marketing for Info Marketers useful, 2 things real quick. 1, be sure to leave any thoughts, questions, comments below, and I will circle back and answer those. Love to see what you've got to say, answer any questions that you might have. That's part of the learning process, right? And the second thing is that I do a masterclass, usually about once a month, which is how to sell your course before you have built it. You can find more information about that and also my Agile marketing programs for info marketers at reverseyourfunnel.com. Thanks for your interest. Again, I'm Kim Snider. Let's get growing.